The older ones.
Me 8 pounds ago.
The older ones. I don't look at those. I don't look at those. I didn't want to do the research.
That's what he said. The ones where he's slender. are the most
Well, he ain't slender in any of them, so, but more so. It's a relative term. All right, so we have thus far done how many approaches to value? Two. One to value residential property and vacant land. What do we call that approach? Sales comparison, right? I know it's tough, I know it's the end of the day, but you got to zone in on it. One to value special use property. That's the one we just finished. What is that called? Cost approach. What kind of property have we left out of the picture? Investment. Income producing property. So, the income capitalization approach. It is a way to simply look at what you expect the property to make in the future and convert that into a value for it right now. Because we really don't care what income it produced in the past. If I'm buying the property, what income do I care about? Well, I care about future income, right? Now, what's the best indicator of future income? Past income. So we do look at past income. But on a test, if they ask you what you're doing with the income capitalization approach, you're converting an estimate of what kind of income? Future income into a value for the property. It's just a way to tie together the future income and a current value. That's what we're doing. So it uses that same big formula that we had back in the property management chapter, that before tax cash flow formula, except we're not going all the way to the end. We're not going all the way to before tax cash flow. Where are we going to stop with this thing? We're going to stop at net operating income. When we value income producing property, we use the net operating income of that property. We also use something called a capitalization rate. A capitalization rate is just how fast I'm getting my investment back. Another way to look at that is, that's my rate of return on the property. When I talk about capitalization rates, that's my rate of return on the property. As an investor, I care about how fast my investment is coming back to me. Does that make sense for everybody? And that's what the capitalization rate is. So this is the formula from your formula packet for the income capitalization approach. There's no subjectivity here. Like remember in the sales comparison approach, it was like, well, you know, maybe it's worth $2,000, maybe it's worth $3,000. It's kind of subjective sometimes. There's no subjectivity here. This is just a straight up math formula. The property has a net operating income. Where would you go find its net operating income?
After doing all the formulas.
You gotta figure it out, right? So you would look at the property's books, right?
Yeah.
You'd want to see how much money did you produce last year. So I can calculate, and how much did you have in expenses? Now I can calculate your net operating income. Your capitalization rate or rate of return is going to come from other similar properties in the area. How much money are they producing and how much did they sell for? That's going to give you a capitalization rate. For your purposes on the test, they're always going to give you the capitalization rate in most cases. Here's what they're going to want you to be able to do. Can you calculate the net operating income? Because if you can calculate the net operating income, can you plug it into this formula with a capitalization rate to come up with a value? Right? The value is just what? NOI divided by the cap rate, right? The value is NOI divided by the cap rate. If they give you the cap rate, and they give you all of the information about how much income the property is producing and how much expenses it has, can you come up with the NOI? And once you've got the NOI and got the cap rate, can you calculate how much this property is worth, its value? That's all you got to do. That's it. So there's no more talking, there's just getting into an example. Because these are formulas you already know. Right? You know that before tax cash flow formula. And if you haven't learned it by now would be a really good time. because you need it again. It says an investment property has the following characteristics. 50 units that rent for $800 each monthly, annual vacancy rates that equal 8% of gross potential income, a 10% property management fee, property taxes of $30,000, and other operating expenses of $58,000. If similar investment properties have generated an annual cap rate of 9.3%, what's the estimated value of the property? Well, our formula for value is what? NOI divided by what? Cap rate. NOI divided by cap rate. Well, they gave us the cap rate. They just straight up gave it to us. What is it? 9.3%. So what other number do we need in order to calculate the value?
NOI.
We need to know the NOI. And how do we get to NOI? That one, right? You need that big long formula to get the NOI, don't you? So you better get used to writing it down. What does it start with?
Gross potential. GPI.
Gross potential income, right? Which is the amount of rent we could collect or the revenue we could generate if everything was full and everybody was paying, right? And then what's next? Subtract what? Minus vacancy and losses. And then what does that equal? Gross effective income, right? And then minus what? Operating expenses. One of which is the management fee. Don't forget, the management fee is not some separate number sitting out by itself. It is an operating expense, right? But now, it's an operating expense that's based on which one of these numbers? Gross effective income. It's going to be based on the gross effective income. Once we've subtracted the operating expenses, what are we left with? NOI, and if we kept going, we would subtract what next? Debt service, which is the monthly mortgage payment, right? And then what would that leave us with? Before tax cash flow, right? Well, in this case, because we're calculating value, how far do we need to go here? NOI. We need net operating income. Correct? Everybody good with that? So, they tell us a lot of things about this property. They say we've got 50 units of rent for $800 a month. So that goes up here on the top line, right? Gross potential. 50 units that rent for $800 a month times 12. Why am I saying times 12? Because everything in this formula is what? Annualized. Everything in this formula is annualized. If they give me monthly rent, I've got to take it out to annual. So that gives me $480,000 a year in gross potential income. Does that make sense for everybody? Other things that they tell me about, that next bullet point says annual vacancy rates that equal 8% of the gross effective income. Gross potential income. So we're losing 8%. How much is 8% of $480,000? So minus $38,400 in vacancy. So that leaves me with a gross effective income of $441,600. Is that right? $441,600
Yes.
for gross effective. Is everybody okay with where we are so far? Good? Now they start giving us our operating expenses. They give us several of them. We got a 10% property management fee, right?
Yes.
So I'm just going to put 10% over here. I'm making my notes. What other operating expenses do we have?
Property tax.
Property taxes of how much money?
$30,000.
$30,000. That's also an operating expense, so we'll keep it on this line. What other operating expenses? $58,000 and other stuff, right? Okay. So, what is 10% for my management fee? First of all, 10% of what number?
The GDI.
10% of the gross effective. Folks, if you don't know that, you can't answer the question. That's what I mean about you have to have this formula memorized upside down and inside out and know where each number is calculated from. Okay? So, 10% of the gross effective income. So we're going to be subtracting out how much in a management fee? $44,160, right? We're also subtracting our other operating expenses of $30,000 and $58,000. If we do all of that math, we end up with an NOI of $309,440, I think.
Yep.
$309,440. Why did we need to get all the way to that number?
So that you can do the other.
Because that's the number we need to plug back into our formula, right? We need the NOI, which we now have at $309,440, and we need the cap rate, which they gave us. Does that make sense? So, NOI of $309,440 divided by a cap rate of 9.3%. The value of that property is $3,327,000 and some change. Everybody see where that came from? Feel okay about that? All right, then let's look at one that you've got on your worksheet. Go over to an example and work one where the answers aren't in front of you. All right. So number 16 is not a, it's not a income capitalization question, but let's go ahead and do it just to get practice with coming up with that formula. So go down to the question. What are they asking us for? What is the property owner's what? Before tax cash flow. So what I want to do is write down the formula right away so that I can start filling in information. Now here's what I like to do. I like to write it down the middle of the page. I like to write it down the middle of the page because what I do is put my notes to the right and my numbers to the left, so like that way I can clearly see what I'm adding and subtracting, all right? So I'm going to write, what do I start with? Gross what? Gross potential, right? Minus what? Vacancy. All right, and what does that equal?
GEI.
Gross effective income. And then I'm going to subtract what? Operating expenses, one of which is the management fee, right? Okay. And then what do I get after I subtract all the operating expenses? NOI. And then what's the next step? Minus the debt service. And that equals the before tax cash flow. And they want me to go all the way to the end, right? They want this number all the way at the bottom down here. So, let's start working on it. We'll read through and fill in. A rental property has 80 units and rent for $700 per month. So what am I going to do with the 80 units at $700 per month? It goes on which line?
First one.
Gross potential, right? 80 times 700 per month, so times what? Times 12, because everything's got to be annual. Here's the thing. I hear a calculator clicking, and that's okay. But I'm going to tell you, I don't do it that way. Because to me, I'm much better off if I take my notes and put everything that's in the question where it needs to be and then do all the math at one time. Right? So I'm just putting the 80 times 700 times 12 on the top line. And during the past year, I've got an average of 5 units that were vacant. So for vacancy, I'm just going to put 5 times what? 700 times 12, right? 5 units that rent for $700 a month times 12 months a year. That's how much we've been vacant, okay? An additional $3,500 in rent was not collected from tenants. So where am I going to put that additional $3,500?
Same line.
That's also on the vacancy line, right? So I'm just going to put a comma and put another $3,500. Again, I'm just kind of making notes for myself here. Annual expenses include the following. A management fee of 10% of the effective gross income. So what line does the management fee go on? That's an operating expense, right? So I'm just going to put a note for myself, 10%. Again, I'm not worried about doing any math, just 10%. real property taxes of $45,000. What line does that go on? Operating expense, right? Let me explain something. Nobody's asked it yet, but I feel like it might be gurgling in your mind out there. Why do we call it before tax cash flow if we are taking the taxes out?
Income versus property?
Yes, two different kinds of taxes. This is before income tax
Right.
cash flow, right? So we do want to take out the property taxes. This before tax cash flow at the bottom is before we pay income taxes, because that's the number you're going to pay income taxes based on. All right, utilities of $60,000. What line is that going to go on?
Operating expense.
Operating expenses. Maintenance and repairs. What line? Operating expenses. So I'm going to put 35K there. Debt service goes down here at debt service, right? Okay, so we got $180,000 in debt service, and then all other operating expenses of $70,000. It goes right back up on the operating expenses line, right? So we got a lot of operating expenses. Have we filled in every bit of information they gave us? Yeah.
Yes.
So are we ready to start doing the math for this thing? All right, that's where I jump over to the left-hand side, because I make sense of my numbers over there, right? So 80 times 700 times 12. My gross potential income looks like $672,000 to me. Everybody okay with that? And now I want to subtract out my vacancy. So that's 5 times 700 times 12. So I got $42,000 in vacancy, right? And what else am I subtracting out? That $3,500 in losses we had. So that gives me a gross effective income of $626,500. Is that right?
626,500.
$626,500 for gross effective. I'm taking the gross potential income of $672,000, subtracting out the vacancy of $42,000, and subtracting out the losses of $3,500. $626,500. Anybody not see where that comes from? We okay?
Yeah.
All right. Everybody good with that? You all right, Sharon? Yeah. All right. So that's my gross effective income. Now, what's the next step? Subtracting out what numbers? My operating expenses. All right. I got a long line of them here, so I'm going to go over to the left-hand side. Minus. The first one is going to be that 10% management fee. 10% of what number? 10% of this effective gross income here, right? So we've got minus $62,650 in management fee, and then minus 45,000
Minus 60.
and minus 60,000
Minus
35,000
Minus 70.
and minus 70,000. Those are all our operating expenses, right? So start subtracting all that out.
I love you too.
Right? So I come up with an NOI of $353,850. Does that make sense? Everybody see where that number comes from? $353,850 for NOI. Now, am I done? No, because it asked me for what?
You're right.
Cash flow, right? It wants us to go all the way. So now we need to subtract out our debt service of $180,000. And that leaves us finally with a before tax cash flow of $173,850. A before tax cash flow on that property is $173,850. We okay with that number? Now, look at number 17. Number 17 says, in question 12 above, what would be the value of the property if the prevailing capitalization rates in the area were 9.6%? So they want to know the value. That's this T-bar, right? What goes on top? NOI, and on the bottom is the cap rate, right, or value and cap rate. And what are they asking us for? They're asking us to calculate the what? The value. So the T-bar tells us we need to be doing NOI divided by cap rate. Go back up to our formula. We already got the NOI. How much is that? 353,850. And we're going to divide that by a cap rate, which they gave us, of 9.6%. And I come up with chump change of $3,685,937.50. Okay? How do we feel about that number? All right? See how we got there? Now, keep in mind on the test, this would probably not be 2 questions. It'd probably be 1 question, right? They probably never ask you about the before tax cash flow. They just simply give you all the stuff in the top question and say, what's the value of the property? You have to know to stop at what? NOI. That's going to be the key, is knowing when to use NOI versus when to use the before tax cash flow. How far to go in that formula. Knowing that debt service is not part of NOI. Is everybody okay with that? So make sure you're good with it.
And it's not part of determining the capitalization, the total value of the property using the cap rate.
Correct. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But if you just fill it in like here, you don't have
You don't have to, exactly.
You just plug it in.
You just need to know what number you go back to. That's why it's always good to write the whole formula.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna.
Okay? Alright, so you should be able to do number 18 for homework. And we are almost done with chapter 17. I lied to you, there's really 4 methods of evaluation. No. There is one more tiny piece of math, though. It's still part of the income capitalization approach, but it's called a gross rent multiplier. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you about this math. It is the easiest math in the whole class, if you memorize the formula. If you don't memorize the formula, you will have no earthly idea what to do with it. A gross rent multiplier is used when you're valuing residential property that's bought for income purposes. Here's the problem. How do we normally value income producing property? Not income, that's residential. How do we normally value income producing property? We just did it, right? The income capitalization approach. What numbers did you have to have in order to come up with that value? You need an NOI, right? And a capitalization rate. How many of you think you can go out and buy a house and ask for the NOI on that house? You can't. Nobody's going to have that kind of record keeping for a house. If you're buying a house and you're looking to rent it out, you're not going to have any books to look at. Does that make sense? So the capitalization approach is too complex for that property. You need something simple. That's where the gross rent multiplier comes in. The gross rent multiplier just basically takes how much the property rents for on a monthly basis and compares that to its sales price. Because what the gross rent multiplier is the number of months it takes you to get your money back. It's the number of months it takes you to get your money back at the current rent. So if you wanted to make that number, first of all, is it better to have a high gross rent multiplier or a low gross rent multiplier? It's the amount of time it takes you to get your money back. You want to get your money back faster or slower?
Faster.
You want to get it back faster. So do you want that number to be higher or do you want it to be lower?
Lower.
You want it to be lower because it's a number of months. I'd rather it take 100 months than 120 months. That's why I ask it in those terms, because you automatically think higher is better, higher is better, higher is better. Not when it's time, right? What's better as far as getting your money back? 100 months or 120 months?
100 months.
100 months is better. So with a gross rent multiplier, it's actually better to have a lower number because it's a shorter amount of time to get your money back. Well, here is the formula. Tired too. There we go. Here's the formula for gross rent multiplier. And you need to memorize it. That's all there is to it. You need to memorize the gross rent multiplier formula. Value goes on the top. And then on the bottom is the gross rent multiplier and the monthly rental rate. The only catch here is to remember it's monthly rental. Because if you think about it, houses rent how? Monthly. This is only used to value houses that are on these investment properties. And here's why it works. Most investors don't really care about the house itself. What do they care about? How much they can make back. So they'll tell their broker, buy me anything that's got a gross rent multiplier of 100 or less. Whatever their number happens to be. If their number is 110 or 120, so 120, how many years is it going to take them to get their money back? 10 years, right? Because it's 120 months, which would be 10 years. So they might just say, anything with a gross rent multiplier of 120 or better, I'll buy it. At that point, they don't care what the purchase price is, they don't care what the rent is. They just care that the relationship between those two is that whatever they pay for the property, they can get it back in less than 120 months or 10 years. Does that make sense for you guys? That's how they shop for these properties. Because for them, the house doesn't matter at all. They care about the income. So, when you look at that formula, you look at an example like this. It says a rental home generates monthly income of $1,450. If the owner investor purchased the home for $172,000, what is the gross rent multiplier? So what are they asking for? They want to know the gross rent multiplier, right? What does the T-bar say you're going to do? Value divided by monthly rent. Like I said, might be the most simple math in the whole class, if you know the formula. Well, what's the value of the property? $172,000. What does it rent for monthly? $1,450. So the gross rent multiplier is 118.62. It would take 118, almost 119 months for that investor to get their money back on that property. What are ways that they could lower that gross rent multiplier? What ways they could make it better? Raise the rent would be the number one, right? If they raise the rent, that would significantly lower the gross rent multiplier. Or pay less for the property.
Yeah.
Pay less for the property.
Right? Pay less for the property would also lower the gross rent multiplier.
And that's assuming they pay cash.
Cash, right? Cash.
They
Good?
ever ask you to do it in years, I mean, and then say, okay, so how many years would that be? I mean,
No, I'm not on the test, no.
Okay.
No, they'll use monthly.
Okay.
It'll always be monthly. All right? So on your little packet again, we'll go back. Make sure you've seen at least one example of this. Number 19. Says Travis purchases a duplex in which each unit rents for $980 per month. Assuming he wishes to stay within a gross rent multiplier of 100, what should he pay for the property? Alright, so, gross rent multiplier formula, what does it look like? What goes on top?
The purchase price.
Value or purchase price, right? And what goes on the bottom?
Rent multiplier.
Monthly rent and gross rent multiplier, right? Doesn't matter which side is which. Alright. So what are they asking us for here?
What should you get?
What should he pay for the property? So the value. They want to know the value of the property. So what does the formula say we're going to do? Monthly rent times gross rent multiplier. Well, here's the gross rent multiplier. It's 100, right? And here is the monthly rent. So what do we need to do? 980 times 100. What's he willing to pay for that property? $98,000.
It's a duplex, so should you
Oh,
multiply it by
it
two?
is a duplex. What a good spot.
Answer, that's why that's scary.
It is a
But I ain't
duplex.
wrong.
So should it be 980 times 100 or should it be 980 times 2? So, oops, eraser. Come on, eraser. Not here. So 980 times 2 is how much a month? 1960. So over here it should be 1960 times 100 or $196,000. Good catch.
I left that other answer. I wasn't one of the answers.
It will be.
Yeah.
I was like, I looked over and I
Will be.
said wrong, and she's like, no.
It will be. Okay? How we feel about the gross rent multiplier? Good. Listen, that's a lot of math to digest. That's chapter 17.
We're moving into the short phase. Writing every day.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it.
Go ahead.
Yeah.